Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our show this evening called My Europe. Our topic today is the United Kingdom, and I promise you we have a very, very interesting guest today, Madeleina Kay. She will say something about her in a few seconds. First, yes, as I already said, our guest today is Madeleina Kay. My name is Eva Onkels. I'm your presenter today. We are part of a series of events called My Europe or Mein Europa. It's hosted by the Europe Direct Center in Aachen. It's an interactive digital series of events that lets its guests discover Europe and different parts of Europe. And I mean Europe, not only countries that are members of the EU. Our guests are normally young people from various countries who talk about Europe and their personal topics of interest regarding Europe. It's every fourth Wednesday of each month, and the next date will be the 23rd of February. Our country we will present there is going to be Sweden. The whole series is organized by a very large network of different groups like the AEG Aachen, it's a student organization, the Institut Français, YEF, the European Federalists, Young European Federalists, the Karlspreis Stiftung and the Karlspreis Academy, of course Europe Direct, but not only in Aachen, but in East Belgium, in the Kreis Gütersloh, in Dortmund, and of course in Aachen. And we have a next event that would probably be of interest for you. That's called the Irish border issue. What's the problem? Professor Michael Dugan will explain it to you, and this show will happen on the 16th of February at the same time as to our event today. The thing is, I don't want to talk the whole evening. So I would like you to type your questions via the question and answer tool, which you can find on the bottom of your monitor or your view screen. I will pick the questions up and give them to Madeleina. And please be free to type in as much as you can. If we would like to answer as many questions as we can. Yes, and I would say, let's start. Madeleina, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself first. What do you do, and why are you interested in Europe? Your microphone is turned off.
I'm on mute. Okay, so yeah, my name is Madeleina Kay. I am an activist, an artist, and a writer. And I won the Young European of the Year award in 2018, and then the Charlemagne Youth Prize in 2020. And I've been asked to promote the open call for this year's Charlemagne Youth Prize. So if you know any young people that are involved in projects that are about fostering European solidarity and integration, then send them towards the EU Youth Prize for this year. So now I am currently working as a social media campaigner for the Media Diversity Institute, and I'm also a communications producer for an arts charity, as well as continuing to do some of my own artwork and activism.
Thank you very much. I know you did a presentation for us. Would you like to show it to us?
I would indeed. So hopefully you can see the presentation. And the topic that I wanted specifically to talk about is the importance of creativity in campaigning for social justice causes and for democratic self-empowerment of the individual. And this is a topic really close to my heart because of the way in which I campaigned and the way in which I had impact. I believe that creativity was really the key to my success as an activist and a campaigner, but I've also encountered a lot of hostility and a backlash for the approach that I took, including misogynistic and sexist trolling and abuse online, but also in person, also from other Remainers, which was a bit of an odd and difficult experience. So I want to talk about this topic because I believe that sometimes people, even who I have political affiliations with, have a bit of a backwards view and mentality of the ways in which you can protest and speak out and make yourself heard. And I believe passionately that creative actions can empower democracy, and it gives individuals and communities a way to express themselves, to communicate their needs, their hopes and fears, and to speak out for the change that they want to see, but in a way that's non-aggressive. It's very noticeable, but non-aggressive. So this is just a summary of who I am and what I've done. Before the Brexit referendum, I was working as an artist. I did environmental arts projects. I worked with disadvantaged communities, such as the homeless and young carers. And I gave community workshops in Sheffield and the Peak District, where I was living at the time. Then when the Brexit referendum happened, that really politicized me, and I started campaigning on more political issues. As part of that, I started writing, illustrating, and self-publishing books. The first one that I did was a children's book about refugees to raise money for my local refugee charity. But since then, I've done other books, including political satires and books of my artworks, including my Brexiles project, which was portraits of British people that left the UK because of Brexit. And that included interviews and portraits that I'd made of them. In addition to the books, I do performance. I've written over and recorded over 20 protest songs, done music videos, some of which have gone viral online, one of which was broadcast on Sky News. I've also performed at places including Glastonbury Festival and the National Justice Museum in the UK. And I've also done a lot of work with documentaries and news and media, and that has really fueled my interest in the media, which I'm going to talk about later on in this presentation. And as I said earlier, I've started working for the Media Diversity Institute on their Get the Trolls Out project, which is specifically focused on tackling anti-religious hate speech in Europe, in European media, as well as disinformation and conspiracy theories. So this photo montage is to basically show you what it is that I did and how I managed to have impact. It was always about the visual. I always had a costume, a new outfit, something where even, you know, people wouldn't know who I was, but they would see me and they would want to take a photograph of it, or they'd notice what I was wearing, and I'd have a message, you know, either the EU flag or bollocks to Brexit, or something that made a very clear, instantaneous visual statement that was hard to miss and hard to forget. And that's how I managed to have impact with my campaigning. And it's why I would encourage anyone to embrace creativity when they are making a campaign. So I wanted to show a very brief clip from this documentary that I made, which won the Young European Video Award. This is another competition that is annual, and they are also currently open for submission. So if you know any young Europeans that are into documentary making, then check that out and make a submission to them. And this documentary that I made was specifically about the topic that I'm talking about today. So
Madeleina, we can hear it, but we can't see the video. I think you have to share another part of your screen.
Let me try. Yeah, so can you see it now?
Yes.
You can. So this is an event that I did in Berlin with an artist called Mia Florentine Weiss, and this is a brief interview that I did with her.
As an artist, can I ask you why do you think it's important to use creativity to campaign for what you believe in?
Creativity is the only key we have, and the kind of seismographic key from a democracy is the freedom of art. Basically, if a country is liberal and you can do whatever you like in a certain way of art, then it means it's totally democratic.
We need to make the campaign more emotive, and we need strong, passionate symbols and voices that are saying it's time to change and it's time to stand up for Europe and fight for our futures, and the future is Europe. We must be the change.
So I'm going to go back to the presentation there. Are you back on the presentation now?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. So yeah, the point that I was trying to show with that clip is that creativity allows us to speak out, and that's part of democracy. And it's about how we express ourselves and how we are heard by others. And that event that Mia did was just before the European elections, and it was about mobilizing voters before the 2019 European elections. And I kind of embraced that idea and that concept and carried on fighting with creativity, even though we lost the EU referendum and eventually Brexit happened, and we lost the campaign to stop Brexit. Before it happened, it matters that we took a stand for our beliefs, and it also matters that we continue to speak out against injustice, illegalities, intolerance, hate. We have to keep fighting for our visions of the future, for what we believe in, because every fight is just a fight. There's always a chance to change, and I do believe that it is possible for the UK to rejoin the EU. I think that it will take a long time for public discourse and views to shift in the UK, and certainly because the young people voted Remain, as they I think there will be a demographic shift towards pro-EU, but also there needs to be a lot of change in the media. There needs to be change in the UK voting system. But I do believe that in, say, 20 years' time, the UK may very well rejoin the EU. And, it took Nigel Farage 20 years to get us out. So, I'll keep fighting to take us back in. In addition to that, these are just some important things about creativity. It has impact, visibility, and a memorable legacy. Visual imagery is attention grabbing, so it sends bold and immediate messages, and it can also make profound and emotional arguments that truly touch people. And that was why the Remain campaign before the referendum, and also the campaign to stop Brexit before it happened, failed, because they were soulless. They did not embrace creativity, and they made so many mistakes. And the thing that really infuriated me was that the mistakes that were made before the referendum continued to be made after the referendum, because we had the same people in charge of the campaigns, and they didn't learn from their mistakes. They thought they were right. They were too egotistical. And this is just a summary of everything that they did wrong and everything that you shouldn't do in a political campaign. Focus on negative impacts, economic impacts, fail to make a positive alternative case, have as your figure speakers untrustworthy politicians who people don't want to believe and don't want to listen to anyway. Oops. Failing to sell the EU membership as something aspirational. They took winning the vote to remain in the EU for granted, because they did not anticipate the protest votes against the elites, against the system, against the untrustworthy politicians. They didn't debunk or challenge the scapegoating of the EU for domestic failures by the tabloid press. And their soulless, boring campaign had a really corporate style of communications that focused purely on factual arguments that just did not engage the apathetic, who are the most likely, the undecided and the apathetic are the most likely to change their minds and to swing from one vote to another. So those are the ones that you have to target with any political campaign. And they failed to incorporate those emotional arguments and human narratives about like the human impacts that Brexit would have, that would actually have meant something to the apathetic and to the undecided. And then after the referendum had happened, we had a campaign for a people's vote for a second referendum. And that campaign self-destructed because of a clash of egos. The same people and organizations who lost the referendum, they remained in power and control of the campaigning organizations. I'll just say at this point, they did not work with me. They would not work with me. They would not engage with anything that I was doing or accept me as a campaigner. So I was ostracized by them. And they continued this corporate soulless style of communications, and the color schemes never really made any sense why they picked them, and they constantly changed them. One time it was green and purple, then it moved to pink, then it went to yellow, then it was just constantly changing. They had like no solid brand identity, and they refused to use the EU flags. People would turn up to their protests with EU flags, obviously, but they refused to have them on any of the branding or to accept that they were pro-EU or Remainers. And the reason why I include this image here of me at the protest was because they printed out all of these corporate branded placards that they'd created to give people to hold, because that was the image they wanted for the press. And the press didn't want to take an image of that because it was boring. The press wants to take an image of real life human activists that were noticeable and different, and this image got very widely spread, used by the media that were covering that event, and that really annoyed the people behind the People's Vote campaign, because I stole their limelight essentially. Instead, they used celebrities and the untrustworthy politicians to promote the campaign, but of course that failed to resonate with the average members of the public who they were trying to reach. They were not clear over what People's Vote actually meant. Brexiteers were not fooled into thinking that they were non-partisan. They knew that Remainers were behind the organisation, even though they were pretending not to be. And they used this term People's Vote, which was very vague and not specific, and it was used to mock them, and it delegitimized their campaign. They dominated and controlled and sapped resources and media coverage away from any other campaigns that did want to be pro-EU and did want to promote the EU, including things that I was doing and involved with. And because these people behind the campaign had lots of connections with the media, they were able to do that. And then eventually the campaign self-destructed in a clash of egos just at the crucial moment. They've now rebranded themselves again as something called Democracy Unleashed. I have no idea what that is supposed to mean, but it's the same guys who just want a cushy job and think that they know how to do things, that have messed up twice and presumably want to mess up again. I don't know what to do about that situation. I found it endlessly frustrating. And these guys still have a lot of power and influence over pro-EU campaigns in the UK. And I don't have a solution until somebody can take power from them. So I'm currently working now on the media issue, which I think has also had a big influence on British democracy, including the outcome of the vote to leave, which is why I want to move on to this. So point, who gets to decide the outcome of elections and referenda? Is it the people or is it the media? And yesterday, somebody tweeted, it's not up to the media to decide who should be the Prime Minister in response to the Boris Johnson Partygate rubbish that's going on at the moment. And I just retweeted it. Rupert Murdoch, he literally has. He's decided the outcomes of a lot of votes and referendum, in my opinion, since 1979, according to Peter Marsden, whoever he is. Rupert Murdoch, of course, owns Sky, and I got invited to do an interview for them. And I wanted to show a little clip from Sky News just to show how hostile the press in the UK was to anybody that was being pro-EU. This was, I did an interview on the BBC as well, and they put me on a panel with two Brexiteers. They're supposed to be impartial and balanced, and it was 1-on-2. And then here we've got some far-right blogs, which have a much smaller circulation, but they would post things about me that were very defamatory and very hostile indeed. So I'm just going to share a little bit of this video from Sky News.
But I mean, forgive me for interrupting, but obviously a lot of people watching will say, well, the way you move forward from here is to actually deliver on what we voted for, which is to get out.
But I don't think that's going to solve the problems that led people to vote for Brexit. If you look at the inequality in the UK, I'm from Sheffield. I've been travelling around the UK for the last 3 years, spending time in different regions, talking to local people about the issues that led to Brexit. And it's things like, people in poverty going to food banks, like the state of the NHS. And what we see with Brexit is the damage it's going to cause the economy. Potentially 2 to 8% damage to GDP growth. If it's a crash out on no deal, 8% damage to GDP growth is going to cause the problems in the UK to get worse, not better. And I don't want to see people suffering more.
If we were to have a second referendum, unlikely that would happen, and the result of the vote was the same, would you accept it finally then?
No, because we live in a democracy and it's my right to keep campaigning for what I believe in. And I believe that But
democracy accepts the result of a vote.
No, because it's not a majority rule. It's not a mob rule. It's always your right to stand up for your beliefs, even if you're in a minority. And I believe that our future is stronger as part of the European Union, collaborating with our European partners.
But are you suggesting that those who voted to leave are a mob?
No, what I said was that a majority does not mean that the people who are in the minority no longer have the right to campaign for their rights and campaign for what they believe in.
Well, look, good to get your thoughts. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
So, as you can see there, these interviewers from these interviewers from Sky News were just completely hung up on this idea of, we won the vote, you're not accepting democracy. They weren't interested in listening to any of my arguments or anything I had to say. They weren't interested in the facts that that I had. They were just hung up on this, it's democracy. That was a repeated theme with the UK media. Every time I did a media interview, that was basically all that the interview consisted of. Whereas in Europe, I had a completely different reception and much more supportive, and also much more embracing of my creative actions. And, you know, they got over the democracy argument because there were many reasons why that vote was illegitimate, including the illegalities of the Leave campaign, the use of data from Cambridge Analytica in order to illegally target ads on social media. That was completely ignored. The Electoral Commission determined that the Leave campaign had broken the law, but apparently that didn't matter. The vote still stood. No, the UK press weren't interested in hearing those arguments. They just wanted to use its democracy to silence any counter narrative or anyone that was campaigning for the EU. Whereas in Europe, the press wanted to hear what I had to say, what the pro-EU campaign had to say, and they really embraced the creative actions that I was using, but also a lot of the other activists in the Remain movement were using. And to me, the European press is far more liberal than the British press because of this. And in the British press, we can talk about Rupert Murdoch, who has a kind of monopoly and control over the, particularly the tabloid and the right leaning news outlets. And he was allowed to do that, even though there's like a lot of dubious legal issues. For example, Margaret Thatcher's government allowed Mr. Murdoch to take over the Times and Sunday Times without referring him to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission. He also owned The Sun and the News of the World, which were huge media outlets. And then in 1990, he preempted formal scrutiny by merging Sky TV with British satellite broadcasting to create this huge media empire where he basically has a massive influence on the media and the messages that are getting out to the public. And I personally believe that this has had a huge influence on elections and ultimately British democracy. Whoever Mr. Murdoch has decided to back has won elections. Margaret Thatcher, then Tony Blair when he decided he was supporting Labour, then back to David Cameron, who then won the election. And then in 2016, he got buddy with Nigel Farage, and surprise, surprise, the Leave vote won. And I think in the UK, just having seen the approach that European countries can take to the education about propaganda and the strategies used by the Nazis in Europe, they are much more sensitive and aware, and they educate people about these tactics and strategies that are used to disseminate communications that manipulate people into believing these abhorrent political views. And in the UK, we don't have any of that kind of media literacy education or historical awareness or education, or it's just completely lacking from British education systems. And as a result, the population are very vulnerable to manipulation by the press. but that is just not acknowledged at all. And in my current work that I'm doing for the Media Diversity Institute, a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with is the demonization of migrants, Muslims and other minority groups by the press. And I work with NGOs who are trying to come up with strategies to combat this absolute bombardment of what, it's hate. It is hate that is being published by these publications, the tabloid publications in the UK. And the reason why they're allowed to get away with that is because the current editorial guidelines, IPSO, allow hate speech to be published if it's targeting groups, but not individuals. The campaign that I work on, Get the Trolls Out, actually had an initiative to try and get IPSO to change the guidelines that wasn't successful. But at the moment, they can publish stuff like this without it being illegal, or without them being prosecuted. We saw that interference also with Brexit. Here they are. We must get out of the EU. There was a legal case with the judges who were described as enemies of the people by the Daily Mail, and they used their sexuality as another way to target them and to encourage hateful opinions about them. And that leaves the question of, if there's all this hate circulating about in the media, where are the positive news stories, and how can we encourage news outlets to report more on the positive stories and share the good news? Okay, so hate sells, sensationalist headlines and anger spreads much further than positive news stories and coverage. But actually, we need to be promoting these positive narratives about migrants and the contribution that they make to society, the value of that diversity, and then I believe if we told more positive narratives, the public would be less hostile to them and more accepting. These are just some examples of stories that we've promoted on the Get the Trolls Out project. And here is an influencer who I admire, who's a refugee from Lebanon, and he moved to the UK. He's now a medical psychiatrist, and he works in the NHS, and he makes such a positive contribution. And that narrative, that story, that positive, people want to see that. You see there's 61,000 likes on this tweet of his. We can tell a positive story about migration and migrants. They don't have to be demonized by the press. And this is where I'm going to advise some recommended reading. This book, I've just finished reading it, and it was really, it's incredible. If you want the economic, social, cultural case backed up by tons of statistics and facts for why migration is a good thing for receiving countries and for the countries that they're coming from, how that benefits the diversity of the world, this book is absolutely fantastic. And I just, if more people had read this book before the EU referendum, I can't help but think that they would have thought twice about voting voting leave. And moving on from that, I just want to talk a bit more in depth about this. How can we tackle this hate speech and disinformation that's spread by the media, but also that's spreading on social media as these platforms become more our dominant way of sharing information and communicating and socializing as well, and how more recently the spread of conspiracy theories is becoming basically more prevalent and wider because of social media and the access that people now have to the internet and to spaces where hate speech and disinformation can proliferate. This image is of protesters at an anti-vax demonstration who are using the Star of David to promote anti-vax discourse. And then, of course, we saw the QAnon protesters who stormed the Capitol in America. And both of these conspiracy theories are spreading online throughout the USA and through Europe. And that's because social media platforms have allowed these fringe ideologies and to spread, and they've provided a space for people across the world to connect and to have these conversations without regulating it and controlling it in these closed groups. And I believe that the closed groups on Facebook are one of the main places where these things are proliferating, and they're not regulated by monitors. And I believe, and this is why I'm also getting involved with more work on internet governance, that basically social media platforms, especially Facebook, need to be regulated better by governments. And this will help with tackling this spread of conspiracies and disinformation that we see. If you want to read anything more about that, then this is also a really great book that I read recently. This is the project that I'm currently working on. We work with it's actually 7 partners spread throughout 6 European countries, and we try to tackle hate speech and disinformation and conspiracy theories by disseminating content that delivers counter narratives, debunks of hate speech that we find through media monitoring activities, and we're specifically looking for incidents of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any kind of anti-religious hate speech, or associated incidents that are trying to turn public opinion against migrants and asylum seekers. When we find those incidents, we write debunks about them, we publish articles, I make social media content, videos, infographics, which is useful for educational purposes, but we also make complaints to the platforms and try to have the content removed as well, including mainstream media platforms. And we also provide workshops and talks for youth groups and trainings for media professionals to try and improve their reporting on minorities. And in addition to that, we're also trying to promote those counter narratives, those positive news stories that I was talking about earlier, and also to give a spotlight to activists that are doing really inspiring work. And this is a nice way that I can still use my creativity and my artwork to campaign and to highlight other people's work as well. And we have various reports and resources on our website. So if you are interested in QAnon, in anti-vax, anti-Semitism and anti-vax conspiracies, or anything like that, then you can check out our website, which is getthetrollsout.com. And that's just a good example of like best practice on tackling hate speech online. As more broad general tips on successfully campaigning, I would say really important is building networks on and offline. The two feed into each other. You know, people that you meet at in-person events, you also connect to online. They're more likely to share your stuff and then invite you to other in-person events. So they feed into each other. And I also believe passionately that people that are campaigning should do more to work together rather than competing for resources like funding, etc. My experience of campaigning, I was met with a lot of hostility and backlash, mainly by other people who were Remainers who were campaigning, who thought that I was getting too much press coverage, or I was raising too much funding for my crowdfunders projects, and they didn't like that. It was particularly older men who didn't like a young woman in their space, and there was so much conflict within the movement. And I just, every time I was met with that, I could not get my head around why weren't we working together and supporting our actions. And I see it now also in the NGO space, where organizations campaigning on very, very similar issues, they're not working together, they're competing with each other. And we need more integration and networking and working together. Achieving media coverage for any actions offline that you organize is really important, because you can then use the digital campaign to promote those offline actions and share the media coverage on the social media platforms, amplifying all of your impact. And it will, if you amplify impact on social media, you're more likely to get more media coverage, and it feeds into each other in this beneficial feedback loop, as I see it. Use that creativity, use that visually striking imagery, use that visual communication. It'll really engage people, but you need to make succinct and persuasive arguments. Don't waste your words, don't waste people's attention. Their attention spans are far too short nowadays. And focus on emotional arguments, focus on human-centered narratives that evoke empathy and understanding. And that goes for anybody that wants to campaign, anybody that wants to write stories for the media. I believe all of these things about creativity. Here are just two really great campaigns that do exactly what I've just said. The first one's Extinction Rebellion. You must have heard about them. They're very visual. They embrace art. They embrace diversity. They embrace militant actions, controversial actions that get people's attention. And then the Led by Donkeys campaign, who have been very effective at using in-person advertising and video projections, but then very, very effective at using those in-person actions and making it viral content on social media. All of their stuff goes viral on social media, even though a lot of them are in person. And they're both trying to hold politicians to account rather than buddying up with them and using politicians as their spokespeople. Using politicians as your spokespeople does not work. It doesn't reach the average member of the public. The level of trust in politicians is not high enough. And so you should use real people, authentic people, people that the public can associate with and relate to. And that's why those human narratives are so important. And so that's everything that I wanted to say. I've covered quite a few topics, but I hope they kind of all link together in a way, and you can get a sense of why I did what I did, and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I just want to say also thank you to the Charlemagne Prize Foundation for also recognising the work of so many pro-European activists and making sure that they have legacy and impact in the future. Because if Brexit has taught Europe anything, it is that we cannot be complacent about the support for the EU. And it is really important that also everybody in European countries, you keep standing up and you keep fighting for Europe.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask, with the questions I already got during your presentation, please be free, everyone, to enter more questions. I'll start with Katie Forster. She writes, I have followed Madeleina all through her journey. I was on all the anti-Brexit marches and feel devastated and genuinely scared by Brexit. I'm 70, so very much older than Madeleina and her generation. I voted in the first UK referendum in 1974 to remain in the EU. I'd like to ask Madeleina how we can best get the 12 million, round about 12 million, in the UK who didn't vote to understand how important and vital their votes would be. And to engage with my generation through creativity in a way that would engage the hearts and minds. The Murdoch and other RW media are so powerful that to fight against it is really hard. We need the EU to understand how bereaved millions of us feel. What would you answer to her, especially the part how to get these 12 million who didn't vote?
I think it's really important to get them when they're young. And I know certainly before every council election or new election that there was since 2016, there's been massive drives to get people to register to vote. And the good thing about the register to vote campaigns is that they can be entirely non-partisan. So you can really push them and reach everyone just by essentially mobilizing democracy, get them signed up to vote. But of course, if they can't be bothered, they can't be bothered. My best friend, she's a doctor. She was a junior a student medic at the time of the vote, and I remember her asking me before the EU elections, what actually is the EU? What does the EU do? I don't really know what it does. And I obviously explained to her and said it's really important that you vote in the 2019 EU elections. She was like, okay, yeah. And then in the end, she didn't, because she had like a long day at work and she couldn't be bothered to go to the polling office. And I wasn't annoyed at her because I could kind of understand it from her perspective. Like young people, particularly in the UK, with the like really high cost of living and high tuition fees, and there's a lot of stresses that just make people totally not interested in politics, in news, and they don't think that that actually voting and turning out to vote will have any change anyway. They don't think they can make a difference, and they're really disempowered. And I think the way to tackle that with young people is through education. We need better education in British schools about what the UK Parliament does, what the government does, and better political literacy. But also we could lower the voting age to 16 to instill this, civic duty to vote. I always think as a woman, suffragettes died to get us the vote. It feels like a duty to vote, but for other young people, they're maybe not even aware of their rights or the suffrage that happened in order to get them. And I think better education about that would motivate them more to turn up and to vote. And for other people, not necessarily just young people, we need communications and what I would term infotainment. So communications that are entertaining, that are fun, that people are gonna be interested to watch on their leisure time, and tapping into cultural activities, like whether it's like comedy nights or festivals or theatres or things that are fun that people are doing in their leisure time. If we can take the campaigns, including campaigns to register to vote, to these cultural events and these fun activities, people are much more likely to engage with them and be receptive to them. I was invited to perform at Opener Festival in Poland in 2018, and that's like the biggest music festival in Poland. And the guy that runs the festival, he set up 2 really huge tents just for NGOs, for campaigns. One was full of stalls of NGOs, and the other one was this big stage, and he was hosting talks, he was hosting my performance and other political speakers, because he knew that taking the politics and the political conversations to the cultural event would engage all of those people that probably just really aren't interested in current affairs and news and politics, and it might just reach them, it might just make them listen. And also, I think it was the EU Commission in Poland, but they had a big stall at this music festival. It was like a chill out zone. There was little cushions to sit on, videos they were showing about EU stuff. They organized activities, they were giving out freebies. There was loads of young people going there, chatting, engaging. And those are the young people that probably wouldn't otherwise have been interested at all in the news or politics. So I think strategies like that can really engage the apathetic, which is what we're talking about. And just on the point of the older voters, actually although older people overwhelmingly voted to leave compared to the younger people, what I saw from my experience of campaigning for 3 years against Brexit was that the people that turned up to those protests and organized those events were all older people doing it on behalf of their children and grandchildren. There was actually very few younger people involved in the anti-Brexit movements and campaigns. They couldn't be bothered to turn up, but their parents and grandparents could. And I think that those people of that generation could do more to talk and, converse with their peers who were the ones that voted for Brexit, but in a way that's non-confrontational and trying to engage that human element of, what about our children's futures? What about our grandchildren's futures? Have you thought about the rights that we've enjoyed that they're losing? And I think that would be the best way to try and change minds of older voters. But it's true that people, once they've made a decision, they're very unlikely to change their minds. I think it takes on average 7 or 8 contact points for somebody to change their mind.
That was the one question that got into my mind during your presentation. Do you think that campaigns like the Stay campaign are too much concentrated on old white males, like people who understand politics, who have been engaged in politics for 40 years, but no one explains to the young people what it meant to be, or what it means to be part of the European Union? So there is no explanation, just look at this, that's how it's going to be. I hope you understand what I meant.
Yeah, absolutely, I do, because I had this constant experience of being invited to panels where I was the only young person and the only woman, and most of the time they'd be all white as well. The lack of diversity, particularly at the top end of the campaign, of the influencers and the people organizing it, they were mainly old white men, and that is not the way to engage a young audience or a diverse audience. You have to what I've also learned through my work with the Media Diversity Institute is you have to give the platform to the minorities to speak for themselves. It's no good speaking on their behalf. You have to give it to them to speak. And it would be the same for young people in the Remain campaign. If we'd have been, I was pushed off the scene in the UK. None of the organizations run by old white men wanted anything to do with me. As a result, they only really spoke to people of their generation. And they repeatedly failed to sell the EU and the positive benefits of remaining. This was something that I actually tried to do with one of my publications, which was called 24 Reasons to Remain. And that was a booklet I'd illustrated a poster with 24 pictures of benefits of the EU, and then created a booklet with 2 pages of factual evidence to back up each of those reasons. And we crowdfunded that to print 10,000 copies, which were distributed across the UK. That was a really useful resource. And it was also engaging for young people because the illustrations were very colourful. And but the campaign, the anti-Brexit campaigns, the guys running that, they didn't want to use my resource. They didn't want anything to do with it. They just completely. I had to crowdfund everything myself, and through grassroots networks to disseminate. I think it was 50,000 posters and 10,000 booklets, because I had absolutely no support from the people that were organising these campaigns that were very corporate and very focused on the negative impacts of Brexit.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you 2 questions by 2 different people, Nina Sehovic and Michael Freitag. The first one is, now that Brexit is done, how would you describe the current mood in the UK towards Europe post-Brexit? Do people see any economic disadvantages? And the second one is related to that, because Michael Freitag wants to know, do you think another government that the Conservatives would try to bring the UK back into the EU?
So I think Nina's question is really interesting because of the timing of Brexit happening just before the COVID pandemic. So what has happened is any of the negative impacts of Brexit have just been mushed up and lost in the huge economic impact, unprecedented impact of COVID on the economy. So the government can essentially get away with anything now because all countries across the world are experiencing a downturn in the economy and rising cost of living and all these problems. They can just claim that it was COVID. So there's that loss of cause and effect with Brexit, which will work to our disadvantage. And for example, actually, there was a report done recently, because I also do communications for an arts charity called Axis, and they're part of the Contemporary Visual Artists Network in the UK, and they've just done a report from a survey of artists and creative practitioners about the impact that COVID had on their livelihoods, and on average they have lost £7,000 worth of income due to COVID. Except when I actually read the report in depth, I could also see that Brexit was being cited as a reason why they'd lost, being able to tour, or but that wasn't like in the headlines of the report. It was it was all about COVID, when in fact what the artists were actually saying was it's also Brexit. So that's not really good news on that front. And Michael's question is interesting because I'm very disaffected with the UK political system because of the first past the post voting system that we have, that basically only allows the Conservatives or the Labour Party to be in control. There's no room at all for the smaller parties. And quite often when the Greens or the Lib Dems or these other smaller parties are campaigning, it's detrimental, because they're splitting the vote against the Tories, and then that enables the Tories to take power. And for me, I am very disaffected with British politics, and I don't really want to get involved in party politics until we reform the voting system, because at the moment we either have Conservatives or Labour in power, and that's not going to change until we have electoral reform. So a government that would take the UK back into the EU in the current situation would have to be the Conservatives or Labour. I don't personally believe that the Conservatives are ever going to become pro-EU again. There's just too big a proportion of their party that is pro-Brexit and that have backed Boris Johnson, and that's now their legacy, and they're too they're too proud. They'd be too proud to admit that they got that wrong and to backtrack on that. So I don't think that's feasible. So then that leaves Labour, and at the moment, even with Keir Starmer taking over from Jeremy Corbyn, I don't see that they're particularly pro-EU. They're certainly not pushing that. They're trying to appease and appeal to those voters that in the red wall seats that swung to voting Conservative because they wanted to get Brexit done. And they're trying to appeal to them. They're trying to appeal to the nationalists, and that means that the EU is off the table. And that's why I said earlier, if there was, a possibility of the UK rejoining the EU, it's going to be, 20 years down the line. We need to have electoral reform. The Greens and the Lib Dems have to be given a chance of forming a coalition government.
Thank you very much. To be honest, I was very shocked to hear that. Give me a second. I was very shocked to hear how much influence this tabloid newspapers like The Sun, The Mirror, the Daily Mail do have on British society. Because, of course, in Germany we have as well these tabloid magazines like, for example, The Bild or the Kölner Express, but they are. Bild is an exception, but most boulevard magazines are not that into politics. So, and in politics is except Bild. I have really to exclude the Bild here. It's most of the time not that influential. And to be honest, I was really shocked. And regarding this, I would like to ask you a question by Steve Hunt. He asked, since the Brexit referendum, the standards of political discourse and behavior in the UK have got worse and worse, leading to the farcical situation we have today with a dishonest Prime Minister being investigated by the police. What do you think needs to happen to give UK politics a reboot? And I would like to ask which role the media is going to play in this possible reboot.
So just before I get to his question, I would like to bring up a German publication, maybe called Compact, because I believe that's.
I do know it.
It is sold by quite a lot of news outlets in Germany, and I only know of it because recently at the Media Diversity Institute, we have published a few articles on this magazine, which is essentially like it's just been determined to be extremist by the German government, and it publishes anti-Semitic, anti-vax conspiracy theories from far right, often Catholic religious leaders, but also other conspiracies, and that is still being sold in Germany, even though it's been deemed extremist. So there are obviously fringe kind of extremist publications, not just Germany, but like all European countries where this hate speech and disinformation and conspiracies are being disseminated. I think what's unique about the UK is how it's like the main newspapers, the tabloid newspapers, that are really sharing this content that's making it so common, so widespread, and having such an influence and impact. And with Steve's question, it's really difficult to say because Boris Johnson seems to be able to get away with anything. We've seen scandal after scandal with the current government, going back right to his election, and his advisor Dominic Cummings getting away with all sorts. And then the media did hold them to account, and it did report on these incidents, but they don't care. They're not resigning, and it's not actually leading to any change. And I think that the current Tory government, they're kind of immune to the press. They're immune to the negative press coverage that they're getting. It was really interesting. They were discussing it on Woman's Hour with these scandals about the parties in number 10 Downing Street during the lockdowns. The only person that has resigned as a result of all these parties and breaking of the lockdown rules is Allegra Stretton, a woman who was basically just used as as like a scapegoat in order to save all of these politicians. And there is a culture of like a lads culture in the UK government where they can basically just get away with anything. And the question is whether the electorate will take heed of the media coverage of the scandals and the dishonesty, and then change their vote in the next election. Of course, there's opinion polls constantly being done, but you can't ever really trust the polls, and we won't know until the next general election if the media coverage of the scandals in UK government is actually having any impact on public opinion.
Yes, thank you very much for this answer. And I would like to ask you a question by David. As an Englishman and a Remainer old enough to be a father, can I just say I hugely admire your work and your tireless campaigning against Brexit, and one day I hope we will rejoin the EU. Is it too soon to campaign to rejoin, and how best do you think we should campaign to rejoin?
Well, firstly, thank you to David for his kind comments. So I would say that it's not too soon to campaign to rejoin if that's what you want to do and you feel strongly about that. But I have reservations about whether now is the time and whether that is a good use and investment of resources and energy. And I'm in this situation now where I am getting asked to be part of these kind of sort of pro-EU initiatives in the UK. I have been asked to support, maybe be part of like a Rejoiners podcast or whatever. And I just feel like you have a limited amount of time and energy and resources to invest in something. And I don't think that rejoining the EU is a serious prospect at this point, certainly not for 10, probably 20 years. And I think that we could better invest our energies and resources into something more strategic. Now, for me, I'm interested in the press and the media and reforming the media. That's why I've gone into the work that I'm currently doing. But I equally think that campaigning for electoral reform is like the most crucial step that we need before we can get a coalition government who would then lead a campaign to rejoin the EU. And there's strategic steps that need to be taken. And I think that if you seriously want the UK to rejoin the EU, then get behind a campaign that's for electoral reform, try and get more Green Party, Lib Dem politicians in government. And if you have capacity in your line of work to, be you an academic or in business or whatever, to be changing views within your sector about the EU, then make those, and about migrants, then join those causes or lobby on those issues.
I would now like to give you a question from Chris Hammond. I'll write the whole text to you again. Madeleina, hello, Chris Hammond, now chair of East Kent EM, watching from Würzburg in northern Bavaria. Also won Festival of Europe team. Well done for all you have done and are still doing. It's absolutely great. And the first question he wanted to ask is how and where can one reach out to young people in the UK?
So I think schools are obviously a key point. So like with my work for the Media Diversity Institute, I gave a workshop recently for there's the European Youth Parliament Network in the UK. They've got regional hubs. They go into schools. They're obviously non-partisan as a charity, but they do educational events in schools. And I spoke on a panel with some local politicians, etc. So that's one way to reach young people. Otherwise, again, what I said earlier about go to where they are, go to the music festivals, go to the cultural events, the places that they're hanging out, and tailor your content and your campaign to reach them, to speak to them on their level. Don't try and force, corporate comms and facts that they're not interested in on them. They're not going to listen. You've got to go to their spaces, be they online or in person, and reach them and that way, and also reach them through the infotainment, the fun, educational content.
Chris also wants to know, are you a member of European Movement National or in a local branch? I have never heard about European Movement National, so...
So the European movement actually exists in Europe, and they organised the Democracy Alive festival before the EU elections, which was in Texel in the Netherlands. And they invited me to perform at that festival. So I know the European movement on the continent, and I've worked with them before. There's also a European movement in the UK, and they have national hubs. And I certainly know like a lot of activists from those different hubs. And then there's the Young European Movement. And of course, I have campaigned with the Young European Movement. And I'm friends with quite a few of the outgoing presidents, including Yuso and Bettina. And I'm in touch with the current president, hoping to do some stuff with the Young European Movement. I'm not officially a member of the European Movement non-youth version, but I would support their activities and what they're doing.
Thank you very much. Now I forgot my microphone. There is one interesting question by Teddy MJ. Where were all the European country members' policy-making power of opposition? He is from Spain, and the Brexit process was something alien to me. I think that we did not do enough as a community, as a European community. Would you agree that the other European countries or nations could have done more to prevent Brexit?
Yeah. So first of all, I wonder if Teddy is part or knows of the Remain in Spain campaign group, because they're a fantastic group. And actually the two of the activists, Sue Wilson and I can't remember now the other activists, but two of them have just been like awarded I think it's an MBE or an order of the British Empire in recognition of the activism and campaigning that they did for the rights of British expats living in Spain. So if he's not familiar with the Remain in Spain community, then he should definitely get in touch with them, because he'd find a lot of, I think, solidarity and a support from that network. But in terms of the policymakers in Europe, I think like there was a certain like they didn't want to touch Brexit. They didn't really want to go. There was very few of the EU politicians that were like vocally speaking out against it. We had Guy Verhofstadt and Terry Reinck, but mainly they were being quite like, particularly Juncker just didn't. I did an event at the European Commission, and I was speaking, and Greta Thunberg was speaking, and they were like really keen, engaged with the climate activism campaigning, listening to that. I ask a question about Brexit, and basically Juncker doesn't want to answer. He basically just Brexit, don't want to talk about that. And I felt really like disheartened and just like not heard and not listened to and not respected, and that they basically didn't care. They'd given up on us. We were just annoying. I think that kind of attitude by politicians is very unhelpful. And I would hope that the younger politicians in the European Parliament realize like the importance of actually embracing the people that are campaigning against Brexit and for the UK to rejoin, and they could have done more to speak out against the madness and the nonsense. But I know for a fact that the EU Parliament and Commission itself did not campaign before the referendum. Apparently they weren't allowed or something. Nigel Farage is running around the UK, blowing the trumpet for leave, telling all these lies, putting out all this propaganda about refugees, etc., telling everyone that Brexit is going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And the EU was silent. It didn't campaign. It didn't, and if they're not prepared to blow their own trumpet, who's going to speak out for them? Someone that's undecided or apathetic or whatever about politics, if they've got one person shouting at them that something's amazing and they should go for that and nothing to counter it, well, of course they're going to go towards that. I do think the EU could have done more, and I think it still does need to do more. And I also think there's a problem with the EU communications, and they are also quite sterile and corporate and not engaging. I think since Brexit, they have improved slightly, and they have had various initiatives that I think are a little bit better and a bit more engaging and a bit more heartfelt, and bringing that soul and that heart back to the EU. But they could definitely absolutely do a lot more, and that includes the policymakers just being more active and vocal on Brexit.
Now I have a personal question for you from one anonymous guest. He asks, or she, how do you handle personal hate comments?
So this is interesting for me, and it was part of what attracted me to the Get the Trolls Out project, because I have experienced so much trolling and abuse myself, and it really it affected me a lot. It really put me off wanting to go into politics or to be a politician or a public figure myself, because I obviously got quite a lot of press interviews and media coverage, and also impact on social media through some of my content going viral on Twitter, and that would lead to absolute torrents of hate and trolling on my accounts. It's in all of your notifications, is coming up constantly. It's under every single post. You can't escape it. And I also saw when those I gave some examples of far-right blogs that wrote defamatory posts about me. For example, one of them was accusing me of prostituting myself out for crowdfunder donations, and that when they published those articles, all of their readers or their followers would then use that story and then come at me with these accusations of me being a whore or a prostitute or a sex doll or like things like this. And I would just constantly see all this stuff in my notifications. And what was worse than that hate was also the Remainers. And it was mainly old white men that didn't like me, a young woman with a slightly alternative approach in their space, who would then try and rally their followers and their community against me. This was both online. There was various campaigns against me from other Remainers, but also in person. There's a particular individual who has quite influence in the movement, and he had a group of followers. And if I turned up to a protest that he thought he owned and he could control, he would scream abuse at me and tell me I wasn't welcome there, and that I was gate crashing his event, and that I was a spoilt brat, and all of these derogatory, misogynistic terms as well. And that made me feel very ostracized and very disaffected and disheartened. And the strategies that I developed for dealing with that was firstly to turn to the people that did support me. So I would seek counsel from, for example, Steve Hunt, who asked one of the questions earlier. He's supported my activism for a long time. He's a great friend of mine. Him and a group of friends, we had a WhatsApp chat. So whenever I had incidents of trolling, they would help respond to that. And I would, also use the haters to my advantage. So a lot of the time when people are writing these troll comments, they're full of spelling mistakes or errors, etc. So you can just use them to ridicule the troll, and that it kind of empowers you, but it also it boosts your content, because they're trolling. If they're writing comments and stuff under your content and you respond or engage with that, it actually boosts your content and your impact overall. So I think I had to, initially when I first started experiencing trolling, you're really offended and upset and sensitive to it, but after a while you just become completely anesthetized and you can't take these people seriously, and you have to abstract yourself from it. But having said that, at the moment, knowing how British politics and the media treat female politicians, and how much abuse and trolling they get on social media, I would absolutely not want to go back to that position where I would be subjected to that on a daily basis. I can now work in a role where I'm combating trolling and hate speech, and it's nothing to do with me on a personal level. It doesn't affect me personally. And for me, that, I think that it's sad that I've effectively been shouted or abused off the scene, but I don't really know what solution that there is. I've just made a personal decision that I don't want to have to put up with that on a daily basis, because it is horrendous.
Thank you very much. As being a journalist myself, I know how many hate comments can come to a person, not necessarily towards me, but towards colleagues of mine. But I wanted to ask you something about positive stories, because of course a positive narrative is great, and I know that most of my colleagues in Germany would love to write more positive stories, but how can we engage readers to read them? I know the numbers we get with good stories, and let me tell you, they are not good. People tend to click on or to read devastating stories online, and it's very, very hard to tell them a nice story, because if you are telling them a nice story, they'll change to another website or to another newspaper. How do you think can media do something against this problem?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult issue, and it's true that hate sells, and the sensational headlines are what spreads and what gets the clicks and what funds the production of the media, etc. And part of that problem, I think, is to do with these independent, basically advertising funded news, where they're creating stories, and they're because they want to get more clicks, more views, so they can get more revenue from advertising, rather than a more public funded model of journalism. So, for example, I actually think the BBC has recently been making really good moves to improve the diversity of its presenters and its journalists. Not higher up; they're very bad still in the editorial and senior roles, but lower down, they've certainly improved the diversity of their workforce. And they're also improving the diversity of their coverage and the topics that they're covering. Now they can afford to do that because they're publicly funded, and they can rely on that revenue coming in to fund the production of those stories, etc. It's more difficult in advertising and funded media platforms, and I totally respect that from your position as well as a journalist, that you have to meet targets, and you have to put out stories that do get read and shared. And I'd say you have to, I guess it's always about finding an angle and finding something that attracts people's attention and they want to share. But I also think that the public we could do with more media literacy education that encourages people to when they're sharing content, to stop and think, is this something that's good to be shared, or actually is it spreading hate and disinformation? And then when they do see something that's positive and uplifting, that they take an action on that, and they do kind of spread those stories. And I think that having so much hate and negativity in the press fosters a culture of fear, which makes people more vulnerable to disinformation and conspiracy theories.
Thank you very much. I have an interesting question again from an anonymous viewer. Do you think it could also be good, in quotation marks, that Brexit happened so that people who didn't believe in the EU or simply didn't vote can feel, again, quotation quotes, the consequences, and hence might want to get into the EU?
So I have a funny anecdote that I sometimes tell about the election nights in Brussels, because if you don't know, on the EU election night, they put on a big show in the plenary in front of the European Parliament. There's stalls, there's little marquees where they have talks and performances going on. There's a big thing, and they're doing all these talks with the politicians inside the EU Parliament. And I was invited by the European Movement to go to and speak at this event that they were organizing in one of those tents. And afterwards I was sat in their stall, and this woman came up to me, and I was wearing my hat that was covered in badges that I designed with pro-EU and anti-Brexit slogans on them. And she was taking photographs of my hat, which a lot of people did, so I wasn't bothered about that. And then after about 5 minutes, she realized that I was British and that I was campaigning against Brexit, and she was furious at me. She was yelling at me for 15 minutes about how I shouldn't be campaigning about Brexit. It was good that Brexit was happening. We were like a bad lover. We should go and get out. And the UK had been responsible for the widening of Europe instead of the deepening of Europe, was her main argument. And she was like, you never even wanted to be part of the EU. You don't share our feelings, go get out, stop campaigning. And I was in this really awkward position where she was just shouting at me. And thankfully, one of the people from the European Movement saw what was happening and managed to get rid of her. But it really made me stop and think, is it a good thing that Brexit's happening? Is this better for the EU? they can focus on deepening, on growing that European sentiment. You know, we were always dragging our heels. And then I did an interview with an activist from Jeff, the Jeune European Federalists in Paris, and he said the United Kingdom has always been a hindrance to the development of the EU, and we will be better off without you. He was like, and then he said, I do want you to come back, but when you are more politically mature. And that kind of that quote has really like stuck with me, because maybe the EU will go on and grow and flourish without the UK, and then maybe a few years down the line we will look at where the EU is compared to where the UK is, and then that will lead people to change, you know, their hearts and their minds. But I have to say that the issue of coronavirus mixing in with the consequences of Brexit is going to affect people's perception of the consequences of Brexit, because they won't be able to distinguish between the consequences of Brexit and the consequences of COVID-19, at least on the economy and certainly initially.
I would like to ask you one last question. What would you say to someone who asks you how to start a campaign? What should he do, or she, of course, and what shouldn't she do? Like, for example, if she's in our age, or he, and not hasn't been political yet, so is unexperienced for it.
So I would begin by saying no action is too small. I always have said this, that it doesn't matter, you know, if it's a tweet, if it's wearing a badge with a message on it, you know, whether it's writing a letter to your member of parliament, no action is too small. You don't have to, you know, I essentially gave up my life as it was. I left my studies at university to campaign full-time. I gave my campaigning 110% of my energy, everything. Most people, they can't do that. It's not possible for them. It's a huge risk to do something like that, and I wouldn't necessarily advise doing something like that. But you can do something quite small, or something where you do give it a lot, but you need to be strategic about how you're using your energy and your resources. That's always what I'll say. And I would say networking and getting involved with existing campaigns and movements is like the best place to start. Don't set up and do your own thing. I saw that so many times with the Brexit, where like a new group would spring up, a new thing where they wanted to do their own thing. Instead of working and pooling resources and collaborating, they want to do their own thing. They don't like this person, and that's destructive and divisive and not effective when it comes to campaigning. So I'd say find out who else is also campaigning, try and join and support what they're doing. But also, you know, you can speak out as an individual, use social media to your advantage, and be creative, be visual. That's always my advice with any campaign, is make a visual statement, because it's instantaneous. When people see it, they, you know, it doesn't take long to communicate what your message is and what you stand for. And it grabs people's attention, and then you can have a conversation. And I would say be non-confrontational, be prepared to listen to counter arguments, or to, you know, people that are uncertain, or, you know, listen as much as you talk.
Thank you very much. We have some questions still open, and I would like you to to answer if how these people can reach to you if they want to answer the question directly towards you. Is there any social media platform you use regularly, or how can people get in contact with you?
Instagram direct messages are good. Facebook is less good because I'm not so good at responding to messages because I've just got too many notifications on Facebook. But I could, you can tweet if it's like a tweetable question. That's great. Send me a tweet, and it's just at Madeleina Kay, just my full name, all lowercase. And if it's anything more longer and in depth, I can try and answer via email, but it might take me a while to respond to things. So I'll just type my email address in, and then but ideally, if it's the length of a tweet, that would be perfect, and I can respond to that on Twitter, and then maybe other people that have similar questions, etc., will get to see we'll get to see the response and also be part of the dialogue. So I would suggest a tweet is good.
Got a sorry. Thank you very much, Madeleina, and thank you to our guests who have been with us the whole time. I would like to invite you again to our next meeting of My Europe in March. No, that was wrong. I'm sorry. 23rd of February, but I'll look it up again. The topic then will be Sweden. Yes, exactly. 23rd of February, Sweden. And if you're interested in the Irish border issue, there will be an event on the 16th of February. Both start at 7 p.m. So feel welcome to enlist there and have a nice evening. Stay healthy.
Thanks for inviting me, and thanks everyone who joined.